After beating the whole game with Toxic Release Valve, I'm still kind of confused why Remnant 2 is considered a shooter. Like, there are guns, but who would waste their energy popping caps when you can roast marshmallows? That's right, it's Mothy back again to break Remnant 2 with another challenge run. Today, I'm turning up the heat. I'm going in on Apocalypse difficulty, and I'm going to take on the entire campaign using nothing but Firestorm to damage my enemies. The community has a love-hate relationship with Firestorm. On one hand, it burns you horribly if you touch it. It has a vortex effect, preventing escape. Oh yeah, and it's usually comboed with AoE size boost to make it gigantic. It's responsible for as many player as enemy deaths. On the other hand, bear witness to this. It's metal as hell. Firestorm makes a fire cyclone that deals 100-ish fire damage twice per second, and adds burning status, which also ticks for about 100 twice a second. That's a tremendous amount of damage if you can keep it off of you and on your enemies. But we're playing by The Witcher fire magic rules. This power comes with extreme downsides. If you try using Firestorm in a multiplayer game, you will quickly get booted after charring the host into one of those unrecognizable black crumbs at the bottom of the toaster. Even the most careful pyromancer will dick things up because the projectile that launches the Firestorm is susceptible to ricocheting wildly, and then all it takes is dipping your toe in and you're quickly ash. Another downside is the very high mod power requirement. In normal gameplay, what you'll do is cast a mod, then shoot enemies with guns for a while to build up another mod charge, but we don't have that luxury. Our build is going to require some problem solving to improve uptime and not immolate ourselves. Let's kick it off by talking traits. Kinship is strictly required for this run because it turns our friendly fire into a friendly fire. To stay alive on Apocalypse, I had lifesteal, damage reduction, health, and armor effectiveness all locked in as well. The lifesteal is quite substantial for this build. Many will tell you Amplitude is required for the AoE size. While Amplitude is helpful in general to catch moving foes, there are several boss fights where the size is irrelevant because the boss is like Faramir just chilling in place on a throne of fire. So that's 49 or 59 of our 65 trait points completely locked down, depending if we're running Amplitude for the fight. The remaining couple points are to taste, but I recommend Grey Health Regen in particular, because the minuscule damage we'll take from our own fire will come back very quickly as Grey Health. Archon is obviously required as our primary archetype for the Prime perk that increases mod generation by 100% for 10 seconds after casting a mod. It also gives 3 passive mod power per second, which guarantees we cannot get soft locked out of action. That's not to mention the other perks, which between them give 30% mod damage, 10% mod crit, and a bunch more mod power generation. The second archetype is more open, but Medic's flat damage and crit boosts are probably optimal. Instead, I started the run using Alchemist because I like making bad decisions. All of the Amulet, Ring, Relic Fragment, and Mutator slots are up for debate. Perfecting a Firestorm build is art, not math, and the optimal stats are going to change on a per encounter basis. If you're against weak enemies who die fast, you don't need damage, so spec for cheaper mod cost and high mod power generation so you can recast frequently. But if you're fighting a boss who stays in one spot, you'll spec for duration and damage, since you'll recoup casts as fast as you can use them anyway. The levers we can move are mod cost, mod power generation, mod duration, mod damage, elemental damage, fire damage, all damage, and you can even make a case for things like crit or skill synergies. Instead of specifically targeting any of these stats, I just aimed for effects with very large numbers that punch above their weight class. For example, the Burden of the Follower ring has a blank downside for us and gives 50% more mod power, so that's obviously included. Even Stone of Malevolence at a mere 15% mod gen boost is outsized, so that's our ring number 2. Our third ring should clearly be the Burden of the Destroyer for 15% damage and a blank downside, but I only acquire that ring partway through this run, so in the meantime I run Shard Banded Ring, which improves mod damage by 12%. By the fourth ring, it's harder to beat the status quo, but Firestone or Tempest Conduit both come with 10% damage and additional resistance to our own fire. This slot is easy to flex into survivability too if you want that. Our Amulet is not locked in for this run, and there are 2.5 great options. Lemire Center gives 50% longer mod duration, which is how you get these really cursed orange screens that turn the game into a PowerPoint. My other favorite is Talisman of the Sun, which increases Firestorm's tick damage by 20%, and the burning dot damage by 50%, bringing both damage sources close to each other. If you just want to set and forget your build, this will be your best option. And honorable mention goes to Golden Ribbon if you care about having haste, which I personally did not. I used Failsafe as my mutator attached to Firestorm. It grants 20% additional damage and a 15% chance not to consume the mod charge on use. But believe it or not, that free reuse was only rarely helpful since we had to plan for really high mod power generation anyway. Harmonizer went on my side gun, which grants 25% more mod power generation for my stowed Firestormy gun. I'm not exactly sure how Harmonizer interacts, but my hope was if I got caught without a Firestorm charge, I could swap to this gun and get a boost to my Archon passive mod generation on the main gun. On the topic of getting caught without a Firestorm charge, you'll occasionally see me use a Fairy Needle consumable, which gives some short-lived mod power charge. This barely helps, and it was more for if I totally whiffed a cast and didn't get back mod power. Okay, I just spent a lot of slots on damage, and I'm planning on having Wicked Lifesteal, but I still have to survive hits for that to help. The 15% health relic fragment is just too good to pass up. Then, I think I just left in elemental damage from my toxic run, and I added mod duration as my last fragment because it said 15% instead of 10. Relic and Concoction are to taste. I personally felt really slow, so I started out with Dark Cider for the health and move speed, but I changed to flat health later. As we get into the run, a quick promo. If you enjoy the content, please consider giving a like, comment, or sub so Albert Gorhythm knows I did a good job. I would love to grow this channel sustainably, and your support means a great deal. Thank you, friends. As much as I'd like to cherry-pick Corruptor as my Yaesha world boss, I once again feel that Phelan/Farron would be extremely problematic with their long immunity windows. I don't even have to veto them though, because I get Morrow Parish Losomn on my first roll. That is a good sign. My heavy armor isn't saving as much damage as I hoped against even basic foes, and I start to worry this run is a huge mistake. It takes active damage reduction from skills and relic uses just to tank basic enemies with my fire. I'll admit now that my build through Losomn is stupid. I thought I could wade through Seas of Fire and enemies in heavy armor with so much damage reduction that lifesteal would cover the rest. Please bear with me until I fix the heavy armor mistake in a little bit. Lamarck District is my first side area, which has no boss, but a bunch of burning immune small enemies. This was a pretty rough start to a Firestorm run. Cotton's Kiln has my first boss encounter with Gwendil the Unburnt. I don't even need to write a joke for this, right? Something the burnt. Grill was easy. This encounter taught me something very important, that many boss fights are going to be perversely much easier than the level areas where I'm fighting small enemies. You just chain a few firestorms and avoid dying for a minute, and bosses are crisp. My next event is hunting for Barghest in Harvester's Reach. It's quite fun to blow up bone piles in one cast, and I look into Barghest on my first pile. While I could possibly lifesteal through his damage, that's moot, because that would require getting multiple storms up, which I don't have the breathing room to do. Instead, I tank up with Resonating Heart relic use, Stone Skin for damage reduction, and Rerouting Cable for some extra shield, and I squeak out the win inside a clean burn in hell. Then I'm already to the asylum. I set a bunch of fires and turned this place into a proper firehouse. I can't shake the feeling I should be eating a submarine sandwich. By the way, a lot of this run is turning out to mean waiting in place post-fight for my own fire to die down. It's not that I can't take the damage, but the vortex prevents walking through it anyway. This is why mod duration is a sometimes food, and I learned it's probably better to just optimize for more frequent, shorter casts outside of bosses. But I don't change anything yet for Ripsaw, and the entire screen is just this orange-white hell as I tank him down. It's this fight that convinces me to swap Alchemist for Medic, because the active shield would have made me feel a lot safer than some limp Alchemist dust. Through Numue's retreat to the Great Hall now, and I'm experiencing more downsides to Firestorm. What it does to my visibility is a proper downside, and I don't see this elite enemy Kool-Aid manning it through my fire until it's almost too late. As a result, I experimented with dropping amplitude here, but the lower radius screws me a few times. Enemies are able to run through visual fire and not get vortexed in, or even take damage. This is anecdotal, but I would swear that amplitude not only affects the size of the fire, but the strength of the vortex too, since I was sometimes able to escape a small firestorm, but never a large one. After I lose the feast event once, because of small radius, I put back amplitude and the event is a breeze. I just have to accept the fact that if I ever touch my fire, I'm going to be standing there for the next 17 seconds. In the Gilded Chambers, I noticed something about the game design. So this balcony has a million enemies on it, but they annoyingly keep coming in pairs. Then those die to a firestorm, and the game waits patiently for my fire to die out before another pair walks in. This feels like intentional game design to not screw players who are fighting conventionally by trickling out foes in manageable quantities, but in a couple areas this gets pretty annoying for me as the fight lasts 6 times as long as it had to. I start seeing Pontiff Sullivans and collecting red coins, so I know a Red Prince fight is coming up, and I'm pretty freaked out about that. His whole shtick is fire, so what if he resists it or is immune to burning? Plus, I'm going to have to waste a ring slot on curse immunity. I waste a miserable first attempt, panicking desperately for mod charge to come back after aiming my first Firestorm stupidly. But we actually beat him second try by spamming Resonating Hearts to tank. Yeah, and also layering 100 tornadoes on both of us. We're up to Nightweaver now as our first world boss. She's taking excellent damage from us in phase 1. Her own attacks are not as bad as I feared on Apocalypse. Oh yeah, did I mention this is my first time ever playing Apocalypse, regardless of build? We're able to regen through her swipes and slams pretty well. We can't get caught without a mod charge when she goes to summon, though. You really need a fire at her feet when the spiders come. I realize Area of Effect is not helping this fight much, so I respect for more gray and regular health regen. This strategy clearly has legs, but so do spiders, and I'm punished for not being precise with my aim. During phase 2, her damage gets spikier, and I cannot take more than 1, maybe 2 hits in a row if the lifesteal is roaring. I finally realize tanking her doesn't make sense, and I'm going to have to dodge, so I downgrade to medium armor and immediately do better than ever. I get her on my 10th try, but more importantly than defeating her is defeating my misguided heavy armor setup. We are now 25% of the way through. The Labyrinth is pretty uninteresting this time. Bastion still roasts easy with low hit points, and the Sphere event is a little tedious since this build is at its worst against trickles of small foes, but we quickly get through to the Labyrinth Sentinel boss. He, sees my strategy and abdicates. Moving on. The next biome I open is Nerud. I'm sad to spawn in Seeker's Rest because I am not at all familiar with the Sha'Hala fights. The night is dark and full of terrors. Amplitude is for sure needed in Nerud because of the wide open areas and flying enemies here. I actually don't have a bad time at all on drones since they tend to attack in clusters, which makes it easy to get mod charge back. Okay, Dormant Nerudian Facility is our first dungeon here. It's the one with the parasites and the Purge event. I go for the Purge again so that I can fight SD OA7, and it's easy to disrespect in a Firestorm. Let's talk about the act of casting Firestorms now, shall we? Using the mod just loads an arcing projectile into your gun. You then have to aim and shoot that, and the Firestorm starts where the projectile lands. The projectile is a little wild though. Hitting an enemy directly or hitting the ground at a high angle of incidence usually causes the fire to pop out, but some of the time it bounces crazy. Bad ricochets were directly responsible for at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 deaths this run. The best way to control the Firestorm is to aim it sharply down rather near yourself, so for this reason, you'll frequently see me playing pretty aggressively with enemies. My favorite play was launching one at nearby foes and immediately dodge rolling backwards. We get the Hatchery as our second Nerud dungeon. Primogenitor is the boss here. These nasty bloatflies will circle the room, but the actual boss is a small blue parasite riding in one of them like a Suriname toad. Trypophobia gang knows what I'm talking about. Don't Google it. This fight is a treat for Firestorm users. I have 100% uptime with storms keeping the sky free of flies, and it actually ticks the boss hit point bar down incidentally, so you can ignore the normal aspect of fighting it when it's on the ground if you want to. In Timeless Horizon, it's my first time finding the crashed ship, which contains a hardcore metal band. This ring feels like an excellent choice if you're going to dedicate a slot to survivability. It gives you a stack of Bulwark, up to 5, for taking damage. Any damage. So warming our toes in our own fire immediately gives a huge amount of damage reduction. It's possible this ring alone would have enabled that heavy armor tank build that I was initially attempting. The Dark Conduit has this cool water rising event that I've never seen before, so I don't realize the gimmick and I die after grabbing only one of the purples. You only get 1 attempt, so I look forward to trying that again in a future run. Then I'm so happy to hit Spectrum Nexus for revenge on the dang Custodian's Eye who traumatized me in my last run. This one ends up ridiculous. He stays pretty still, so I'm able to launch a stupid amount of Firestorms on him at once and torch the creep, giving birth to my own flaming Eye of Sauron in the sky. Also, Spectrum Nexus before this boss is one of those Firestorm unfriendly areas where the enemies slowly trickle in by design. This one room took like 5 minutes because I kept having to handle singleton robots showing up after the last one died. I nab an override pin, but I actually still have that earmarked for the Nightweaver's web, so we're going to fight the coming boss in normal mode. And just like that, it's time to make our build for Sha'Hala, the world boss of Nerud. This boss is much less spikier than Nightweaver, but it's much harder to avoid the many instances of smaller damage. I spend my first several attempts trying to Firestorm his orb. That's normally his weak spot, but my aim seems off because I can't seem to land a storm on it. I waste 3 or 4 deaths testing it out, then I conclude that his orb is actually just immune to Firestorms. It simply doesn't have a hitbox the projectile can ignite on. So what can we do? Well, what we have to do is avoid his lasers, lightning, and ground damage things for quite a while until he makes the room go dark and becomes vulnerable to us. He summons one or two of his hands, then a black hole, any one of which are lethal if they touch you. But after dodging the black hole, I get a few seconds of free damage to summon firestorms on the hands. I could put fire on the black hole as well, but this despawns pretty quick, so it's better to just aim for the hands. Silver lining, we can actually skip kinship and amplitude for this fight, since our firestorms only go to safe, predictable spots, though that does just add another threat on the battlefield I have to avoid. I stick the spare points into evade distance, which helps a great deal dodging his lasers and avoiding the black hole vortex, and into regen to recover any chip damage. It takes about 12 attempts to accumulate this strategy since I didn't know this boss at all beforehand. Then it's just a matter of not messing up for long enough to secure the win. We take him down on try 24 after 12 deaths of learning the fight from scratch and 12 more trying my hardest. Very health regen and evade distance overperform here. That's 50% of the way through the run now, and I'm getting some confidence on this. Still pretty worried about the final area, but that's not yet. We have to roll our Yaesha. I'm praying for Red Throne here because Firestorms absolutely thrash Corruptor and his little golem friend. Alas, it's a Ravager line. Again. I swear it's like 80-20 in favor of Ravager. We hit the Root Nexus boss right away, this time the super hit point version. It has a very high health pool and doesn't move at all, so I light this thing up like a jack-o'-lantern and toss an occasional firestorm outward when an elite spawns. In Indira's End, I notice a goofy interaction. Yup. So, normally firestorms will chase elite enemies or bosses who move through it. This is how Firestorm stays relevant against mobile bosses. But for this grenade launcher elite in Indira's End, one of its grenades actually zips the fire along with it, saving the enemy from the fire. Clever girl, possible bug. We do that pressure plate maze because it contains an aberration. Fighting Fester with his minions in such a small area is kind of intense with Firestorm, but I convert the room into a microwave and emerge victorious. There's also this atrophy aberration who dies to Firestorm. I don't know, I could barely see. Next up is Nameless Nest and the Mother Mind boss. I have full freedom to go bonkers with fire on this since she stays put mostly. The lifesteal is so good here that I can fight really sloppy and still sail through it. Faithless Thicket introduces these meatball enemies who roll at you for high damage. Yes, Firestorm easily neutralizes any one of them, but they die so fast it's barely worth casting the mod since I won't regen another. This has been a tactic for most of the run, but I will highlight it here. Against small enemies, it's never worth firestorming a single one. The best practice is running from it, gathering more enemies until you have a whole crowd behind you like the Drew Carey Show intro, then turning around and blasting them all at once. The Imperial Gardens have this flying Mantagra aberration. I'm thinking, geez, probably have to ignore this one, right? But when there's no other boss or encounter on the whole map, I decide that I should go for it. It's actually not too bad. After landing a shot, a firestorm will trail the Mantagra through the air like a beautiful burning comet. The tricky part is just landing the shot. I arced this beautiful snipe from downtown. Then it seems like I missed it at first, but all of the damage catches up at once and I secure the dub. Also, I learned archers go down nicely in one firestorm. When they teleport, it just chases them down. It's pretty nifty. Legion boss comes soon in the Twisted Chantry. After my experience with Sha'Hala, I'm a little worried that the eye won't have collision detection either. Thankfully, it does, and I light it up like a Christmas tree. The Chimney is our last Yaesha side dungeon with a Rot aberration in it. He is dangerous, but our high DPS is good for covering up a lot of mistakes. Then it's the Crystal Drop event. There's barely any killing this time, since I don't want to place any firestorms ahead of me where they will inhibit my movement, so I mostly dodge through and sometimes send a firestorm backwards to block for me. That's easy, and we're finally through to our Ravager fight to cap off Yaesha. I shouldn't have been praying for Corruptor because this fight was easy. I respect off of Amplitude and brought the Resonating Heart for better healing in case of emergencies, but this was overthinking it. Just launch fire at him, then launch more fire at him. He burns up so easy, like dryer lint in a drought. I even let him eat the dough mid-fight to power up, which gives a reward that I have never earned, and still easily first try him. And that's our last normal biome handled. Apocalypse is so much less scary than I had feared, and I'm just out here memeing through it. We're 75% of the way done now, and it's time for Root Earth. I go back to my leveling build, which basically means just Amplitude again. Root dogs, like meatballs, die so fast that it's not worth storming any fewer than 3 of them. This train yard event is a breeze, and I'm happy to discover that firestorms, like Toxic Release Valve, sneak their full damage in regardless of weak or strong points against this mini venom. Cancer boss is up, and he is so simple on a Firestorm build. Most bosses are too big to get affected by the Vortex aspect of Firestorm, but not Cancer. He is locked in place while I am free to cast repeatedly at him. I do die one time to his jumping shockwave move, but that's because with him locked in the Vortex, I don't notice his little hop in place that normally telegraphs the shockwave. The next try, I jam 1,000 Firestorms on him and turn my game into a slideshow. He's glowing like the morning sun. I guess if you want any actual takeaways for this fight, the fragile sticks he creates do block the Firestorm projectile, so be careful when you aim it. The tripods in the harbor are trivial with Firestorm. It seems like their ads they like to spawn come in at their feet, which is a foolish place to spawn against my horseplay. Then in the tripods plus venom room, I snipe the venom with a time lapse, which gives me the time to reach the ramp. From there, I light up the room like Las Vegas, and the various ads die as they try to approach me. The cozy red room event is nice and calm, then Bane does take me 3 tries. Nothing complicated here, there's just a lot of chaos in this fight, and stray projectiles got me the first 2 tries. On the 3rd fight, I realized that his health is so low that I can just multicast Firestorms and have him dead before the 2nd Venom even pops out. Proper Venom, the penultimate boss, is also easy, but I die a couple times here. He seems to get caught in my Vortex at first, but then he does bust out. Venom's spike damage is quite high, but his health is not too high, so this fight boils down to spiking him down while avoiding making mistakes for just a minute or 2. I get him on try 3. Then, all of a sudden, we're up to the final boss, Annihilation. This fight posed so many awesome puzzles to solve. Our first question, can we get away without using the kinship trait? Most of this fight is done at a distance, and I could use the extra trait points. But it turns out the boss's quite common uppercut attack travels at and through me in a way that brings the fire in a major way, so yes, we do need kinship. Then his red balls attack is a showstopper. Annihilation summons these red balls that hover for a moment before charging you for lethal damage if you haven't shot them down. I tried maxing amplitude, and the balls do burn up when he creates them. But this just introduces a new problem. When he travels through me on that uppercut attack, because of amplitude, I was getting caught in the vortices now that they're juiced. So I tried to solve without amplitude. Instead, I tried playing with dodge distance, which kind of worked. A normal-sized Firestorm can kill half of the red balls, and a boosted dodge got me through the rest. But this was not reliable, and he does use this attack many times in the long fight, so I wanted a safer solution. I went back to amplitude for a little more testing, and it turns out it's not as bad as I thought. You do get whooshed a little by the fire as he brings it through you for the uppercut attack, but I realized the fire is in fact glued to him and follows him, and after the initial jostle, I am free to move. With that one attack strategized, we've now solved the hard roadblock of the fight and earned a seat at the table. But I have another consequential new problem. That uppercut move is always followed by a big slam wave, and being jostled by the fire, plus the fact that my whole screen is glowing red-orange, makes it very difficult to perceive him to time the slam correctly. This one, you can't just get by on audio cues either, because your distance from him affects when you should dodge, and that's going to vary. This was just a skill issue, and a pretty tough one to fix. If I angled the camera just right, I could sometimes see his glowing red hand through the fire to help me track the move, but I ended up having to just tank this attack pretty frequently. Our trait points for this fight are stretched very thin, with amplitude and kinship both required, plus the usual gamut of survivability traits. We now have 6 flex trait points to spend. It turns out Annihilation's attacks, aside from the red balls, don't do that much damage, so hit point regeneration is helpful for topping off instead of having to blow a relic. I split my anemic spare trait points between gray and regular regen. But check this tech for regen. The boss will occasionally fly up high and idle for a second between combos to give you a chance to breathe. But you can aim your gun at him while he's up there, and then he'll juke to the side to mess with your aim as many as 3 times back and forth. The juke's on him, though. If I had taken a hit and wanted time to heal, I could aim my gun at him with no intent to shoot, just to make him dance back and forth and spend extra time in the air while I regen hit points. That's not to mention, he is on fire, so he's still taking burn damage while I waste his time with this. I'm pretty proud of realizing that I could do this. Speaking of his hover phase, though, Firestorms actually won't hit him while he's up there, even though they track him at ground level. This is weird to me after seeing how Firestorms were able to track Mantagora through the open air. My first several attempts on this boss used Lemire Sensor for the mod duration, but then when I realized how much time he was spending in the air, it was obvious I should boost my burning damage. I finally swapped to the Talisman of the Sun, and my DPS went way up. Annihilation's Phase 2 was easier than his Phase 1 for me. The boss does not fly out of Firestorm range, and I spent less of my time dodging attacks. Getting data corrupted often did prevent using my mod for a few seconds each time, but that was not a gigantic downside. I had 2 important innovations for Phase 2. First, the dimensions do not share firestorms, which is kind of tricky because I wanted uptime on both. I learned to let the boss burn down when he was transitioning into Phase 2 so that I always had a fresh cast going into the B dimension. Then I also sandbagged casts a little if I knew he was going to change phases soon. Second, since he now shifts dimensions between 2 hits in his combos, it's actually much easier to see and deal with his slam wave attack that normally follows the uppercut in Dimension A, since he's not covered in orange light now. When we warp back into Dimension A, I can actually see what the boss is doing and dodge that attack much better. With all of those problems solved, this fight just came down to playing good for long enough. I took him down on my 23rd try after avoiding making errors for long enough for him to burn. That's our 100% Firestorm run complete, and Mothy's first ever Apocalypse run too, so I grabbed my reward weapons and a ring that looks very interesting for future challenges. Firestorm gets so much hate thanks to bad multiplayer experiences, but honestly, after experiencing how devastating this build was, I'm kind of more on the side of run kinship and get over it. I'd be pretty excited to see what 3 people running this build in the same game could accomplish. Unlike Toxic Release Valve, this build was not swingy. It's not like I had a really easy time on some encounters and a hard time on others, aside from having to learn Sha'Hala and Annihilation, of course. Firestorm is just good. Say yes to Firestorm. Thank you so much to all of you for the outpouring of support both here and on Reddit. I love hearing that I inspired others to try my builds, and I love all the suggestions as well. I will be taking a vacation without my equipment next week, so it will be a little longer until my next Remnant run, but I have some Souls content scheduled, so do subscribe if you'd like to keep up. Lies of P is looking pretty ripe for challenges as well. Until next time, peace out, Girl Scout.